Who gave permission to do this? The words exploded out of Ethan Cole's mouth before his mind had time to catch up with his eyes. For a split second, he thought he was seeing a reflection, some strange trick of light bouncing off glass and steel in the half-dark of early morning. This office did that sometimes. It distorted space, made everything feel unreal before sunrise. Then the chair moved. Ethan froze just inside the doorway of his executive office, one hand still wrapped around the cool metal handle. His heart slammed hard against his ribs, not from fear, but from shock so sudden it felt physical. This floor was private. This office was sealed. No assistant, no executive, no security chief. No one entered this room without his direct authorization. No one but him. And yet a child was sitting at his desk. Who gave permission to do this? He repeated, louder now, the authority in his voice sharpened by instinct and disbelief. The girl flinched. It was small, almost imperceptible, a brief tightening of her shoulders. A tiny hitch in her breath, but Ethan saw it. Her fingers paused above the keyboard for half a second, as if startled by the sound of his voice. But her eyes never left the screen. That detail unsettled him more than anything else. She didn't turn around right away, didn't scream, didn't jump down from the chair or look for an escape. Instead, she leaned closer to the monitor, studying something with intense concentration, her face lit by shifting lines of data. Ethan's mind raced. This office was protected by layered biometric access. Retinal scan, fingerprint, encrypted personal key. The workstation itself was air-gapped, isolated from the rest of the building's network. He had approved every protocol personally. He had trusted no one else with final authority. This space was designed to be untouchable. "Step away from the computer," he said, forcing his voice into calm, even as his pulse thundered in his ears. "Right now." The girl swallowed. He saw her throat move. She was young, much younger than he had first registered. 6 years old, maybe. 7 at most. Her feet dangled above the floor, sneakers hovering inches from the polished wood as if gravity itself hadn't quite claimed her yet. "I just need one more second," she murmured. The words were barely audible, but they landed with weight. Ethan took a slow step forward, then another, stopping at the edge of the desk. Up close, the impossible became undeniable. The monitors were active, not locked. Windows overlapped and reorganized themselves as the cursor moved with deliberate precision. System architecture diagrams, security pathways, live diagnostic feeds. His feeds, anger flared, sharp and instinctive, not just at the intrusion, but at what it implied, at the failure, at the idea that someone had slipped past a system built to anticipate every threat. "Do you have any idea where you are?" he asked. She nodded faintly. "Your office." "That's right," Ethan said. "And no one is allowed in here. No one. Do you understand that?" This time she did turn her head slightly, just enough for him to see her face in profile. Her eyes were wide, dark, and serious, too serious for someone her age. There was no mischief there, no thrill of doing something forbidden, only urgency. "I know," she said quietly. "That's why I came early." Ethan stared at her. Outside the windows, Manhattan was waking up. Traffic crawled through intersections. Delivery trucks rumbled below. The city moved forward, oblivious to the fact that the most secure room in one of its most secure buildings had just been breached by a child. "How did you get in here?" he demanded. She hesitated, just for a moment. Then she answered, still watching the screen. "The cameras don't all wake up at the same time," she said. "There's a little gap." My dad said gaps are where problems hide. Ethan's stomach tightened. That wasn't something a 6-year-old should know. He followed her gaze to the monitor and felt a cold ripple pass through him. The system map pulsed softly, sections lighting up and dimming in steady rhythm. At first glance, everything looked normal, clean, efficient, exactly as designed. But then he saw it, a narrow segment near the core. A relay zone meant to reduce redundancy, to streamline performance. It flickered just slightly out of sync with the rest of the grid. "So you decided to fix it?" Ethan said, his voice edged with disbelief. She nodded again. "It's not watching itself," she said. "It only watches everyone else." The simplicity of the sentence made it worse. Ethan had reviewed that architecture dozens of times. So had senior engineers with decades of experience. The segment she was pointing to was intentional, optimized, elegant, and Suddenly, unmistakably vulnerable. That part can't be accessed externally, he said, more to reassure himself than her. She shook her head. It can if you already know where it's blind. Silence filled the room, heavy and charged. Ethan became acutely aware of how alone they were. No assistants on the floor yet. No footsteps in the hallway. If he called security now, they would arrive to find a child at his workstation and a system doing something it should not have been able to do, and he would have to explain how it happened. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated this time, her fingers finally leaving the keyboard as she turned fully to face him. Up close, she looked even younger. Small hands, slight frame, a face that still carried the softness of early childhood. "Annie," she said. "And why are you here, Annie?" Her gaze dropped. Just for a moment, before lifting again. "My dad used to work here," she said. "Before they said he broke the rules." The words struck something deep and buried. Ethan straightened slowly. He remembered the file now. A security engineer. Quiet. Thorough. Terminated after an internal breach investigation that had closed too neatly, too cleanly. At the time, Ethan had signed off without question. "You shouldn't be here," he said, not unkindly, but firmly. "This is dangerous." "I know," Annie replied. "But if I don't fix it, someone bad will find it first. And then they'll say, 'My dad did it again.'" That was when Ethan understood. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't a child wandering where she didn't belong. This was purpose. He looked around his office, the glass walls, the silent screens, the city stretched beneath them like a circuit board, and felt the first real fracture in his certainty. For years, he had believed that control was a matter of design, that if a system was built well enough, it would protect itself. Now a 6-year-old girl sat in his chair, eyes locked on his computer, trying to repair something the adults had missed. And Ethan Cole realized, with a chill that settled deep in his chest, that whatever Annie had uncovered was not just a flaw in his software. It was a flaw in the world he had trusted. Ethan did not call security. The realization came to him slowly, almost reluctantly, as he stood there watching Annie's eyes track patterns on the screen with unnerving focus. His hand hovered near his phone, thumb resting just above the edge where a single press would trigger a silent alert. Protocol demanded it. Common sense demanded it. Yet something deeper held him still. "Take your hands off the keyboard," he said again, more quietly this time. Annie's fingers stilled. She obeyed the instruction precisely, lifting both hands and placing them flat on her knees. Still, the screen continued to update on its own, lines of data adjusting as processes completed cycles she had already set in motion. "I didn't change anything important," she said quickly, as if afraid the silence might harden his resolve. "I was just watching it happen." Ethan studied her, searching for signs of deception or bravado. There were none. Her shoulders were tense now, her small back straight against the chair, but her gaze flicked only briefly toward him before returning to the monitor. "Not defiance, vigilance. You understand that what you did is illegal," he said. She nodded once. "My dad told me that sometimes doing the right thing gets you in trouble anyway." The sentence hit harder than he expected. If this moment made you pause and think, share your thoughts in the comments where you are watching right now. Do you believe doing the right thing should ever come with a price? Please like this video if the story moved you, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story. Ethan pulled his chair back and sat down across from her, choosing a position where he could see both Annie and the screen. The leather creaked softly under his weight. From this angle, the system map filled his vision, every node and relay painfully familiar. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "Since it was still dark," Annie replied. "I waited until the cleaning people finished the big floors. They don't like the top ones." That made sense. The executive levels were cleaned last, often by a skeleton crew eager to leave before dawn. Ethan made a mental note of yet another gap no one had bothered to close. "And no one saw you?" She hesitated. "They saw me," she said carefully. "They just thought I belonged with someone else." Ethan exhaled through his nose. He had lived long enough to understand exactly what that meant. He leaned closer to the screen. "Show me what you were looking at." Annie glanced at him, uncertainty flickering across her face. For the first time since he had walked in, she seemed unsure. "You won't be mad?" she asked. Ethan paused. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without blinking, dismantled competitors with a single phone call. Yet answering a 6-year-old felt like stepping onto unstable ground. "I can't promise I won't be upset," he said honestly. "But I will listen." That seemed to matter. Annie reached out again, fingers hovering for a brief second before returning to the keyboard. This time, she worked more slowly, as if narrating her thoughts for him rather than racing ahead. She opened a layered view of the security architecture, isolating a narrow channel near the core. "This part," she said, pointing. "It doesn't talk back." Ethan frowned. "It doesn't need to. It's a relay." "I know," Annie replied. "But everything that matters talks back." She toggled a diagnostic overlay. Tiny delays appeared, fractions of a second invisible to casual monitoring but glaring when stacked together. Ethan's breath caught as recognition set in. She wasn't wrong. "Who showed you how to read this?" he asked. "My dad," Annie said. "He said systems are like people. If you only listen to them when they're loud, you miss the truth." Ethan leaned back, the weight of the statement settling into him. He remembered saying something similar years ago, back when Titan Shield was nothing more than an idea scribbled on a whiteboard. "What's your father's name?" he asked, though he already suspected he knew. Annie's fingers tightened together. "Marcus Hill. We get to this." There it was. The file surfaced in his mind immediately. Senior security analyst. 10 years with the company. Dismissed after an internal review found evidence of unauthorized access attempts. The investigation had been swift, decisive, and, at the time, unremarkable. Ethan had trusted the process. "When did he leave?" Ethan asked. "Last year," Annie said. "After that, he stopped talking about work. Then he stopped talking about a lot of things." As Ethan looked at her hands, small and clenched in her lap. "And you decided to fix this for him?" She shook her head. "No. I decided to stop it from happening again." The distinction was important. Ethan stood and walked to the window, needing space to think. Below him, the city moved with practiced indifference. People went to work believing the systems they relied on were solid, tested, fair. He had built those beliefs. "When you came in," he said slowly, "what did you expect to happen?" Annie thought for a long moment. "I thought I would finish before you got here," she admitted. "I wanted to leave you a note." "A note," Ethan repeated. She nodded. "My dad says people listen more when they're not embarrassed." A bitter smile tugged at the corner of Ethan's mouth. "Your dad sounds like a wise man. He used to be happier," Annie said softly. The room fell quiet again, filled only by the muted hum of servers hidden behind walls. Ethan felt the familiar pressure of responsibility tighten in his chest. But this time it wasn't about shareholders or headlines. It was about the cost of being wrong. "You can't stay here," he said finally. Annie's eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. "I know," she said quickly. "I'm almost done." "That's not what I mean," Ethan replied. He turned back to face her. "You can't be the one carrying this." She studied him, searching for something. "Will you look at it?" she asked. "Really look. Not like last time." The words stung. "I will," Ethan said. "But you need to tell me everything you know, starting from the beginning." Annie nodded, relief and exhaustion mingling on her face. She slid out of the chair, standing beside it, suddenly very small in the vastness of the office. "I just want them to stop saying my dad did something bad," she said. "He didn't." Ethan met her gaze and felt a quiet resolve settle in. "Then let's find the truth," he said. The whole thing. For the first time since he had walked into his office that morning, Annie looked away from the computer and directly at him. And she believed him. Ethan locked the office door. The soft click echoed louder than it should have, sealing them inside a room that suddenly felt smaller, heavier. He didn't do it out of fear that Annie might run, but because for the first time he was aware of how exposed this moment was. If anyone walked in now, an assistant, a security chief, a board member, there would be no clean explanation. Only consequences. "Sit," he said gently, pulling one of the smaller chairs closer to the desk. Annie obeyed, folding her hands in her lap the way children did when they were trying very hard to be good. Her eyes flicked once toward the door, then back to the monitors, as if worried the system might change without her watching it. Ethan returned to the workstation. The screen still displayed the layered architecture Annie had opened, the narrow relay zone pulsing faintly, almost shyly. at the center of everything. This design, Ethan said slowly, more to himself than to her, went through 6 review boards. Annie nodded. That's why nobody looked at it twice. He glanced at her. Explain that. She slid off the chair and padded closer, careful not to touch anything without permission. When something passes all the checks, she said, people think it's safe. My dad says that's when it's the most lonely. Lonely, Ethan repeated. No one watches it anymore, Annie explained. Because everyone thinks someone else already did. Ethan felt a chill creep up his spine. He pulled up the original design notes, the ones he hadn't looked at in years. There it was, the relay optimization. Approved unanimously. A clever solution to reduce system load during peak operations. Elegant, efficient, blind. Show me exactly what you saw, he said. Annie climbed back onto the chair, this time waiting until he nodded before touching the keyboard. Her movements were slower now, deliberate, almost ceremonial. She navigated to a log file buried beneath layers of routine system noise. At night, she said, this part goes quiet. Too quiet. Ethan watched as she isolated a sequence of timestamps. Nothing obvious, no alerts, no failures. Then she overlaid a secondary feed. The pattern emerged immediately. Access requests routed through the relay weren't disappearing. They were being deferred, redirected just long enough to bypass scrutiny before rejoining the system as legitimate traffic. Ethan's throat tightened. That shouldn't be possible, he murmured. Annie shrugged. It's only possible if you know it's there. He ran his own diagnostic. Fingers flying now, years of muscle memory returning. The results confirmed it. Every access routed through that relay inherited the trust of the system without ever being fully examined. A perfect place to hide. When did you find this? He asked. Annie hesitated. After my dad came home with his box. The words were simple, but the image they conjured was not. Ethan pictured it easily. A cardboard box. A man carrying his career in his arms. The quiet humiliation of being escorted out by people who used to greet you by name. He didn't tell me what happened at first, Annie continued. He just kept saying he should have been more careful. Ethan swallowed. He was careful, Annie said, her voice firmer now. That's why they blamed him. Ethan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. He had seen this before, not here. Not at Titan Shield, he told himself, but elsewhere. In other companies. Other industries. The quiet math of blame, where it was easier to sacrifice one good man than to confront a system-wide failure. Or worse, intentional abuse. Your father reported this, Ethan said. Annie nodded. He said he wrote everything down. He said he followed the rules. And then the evidence disappeared. Ethan finished. She looked up at him, startled. How did you know? Because he'd seen it too many times. Ethan turned back to the screen and pulled up access histories from the period surrounding Marcus Hill's termination. At first glance, everything looked clean. Too clean. Logs trimmed. Metadata normalized. Human hands had been there, smoothing edges. Someone with authority did this, Ethan said. Annie's shoulders sagged slightly, as if a weight she'd been carrying finally had a name. I told my mom, she said. She said grown-ups don't like it when you point at their mistakes. A bitter truth, delivered without bitterness. Annie, Ethan said carefully. You understand how dangerous this was, right? Coming here alone, she nodded. But it was more dangerous to stay quiet. The answer left him momentarily speechless. He remembered being that young, sitting at his mother's kitchen table while she balanced bills and worry in equal measure. Remembered promising himself he would build something that made the world fairer, safer. Somewhere along the way, fairness had been replaced by efficiency. When you were working, he asked, what were you trying to do? Fix it? Or prove it? Annie considered the question. Both, she said. If I fix it, they can't say my dad did it again. If I prove it, maybe they'll say they're sorry. Ethan closed his eyes. Apologies did not come easily to institutions, or to men like him. You did more than most adults would have, he said quietly. She shook her head. I just didn't stop looking. Ethan felt that land somewhere deep. He saved copies of the logs Annie had uncovered, exporting them to an isolated drive he kept for emergencies. The act felt significant, like crossing an invisible line. This stays between us for now, he said. Do you understand? Annie nodded, but there was uncertainty in her eyes. Are you going to tell them? Not yet, Ethan replied. First, I need to understand how far this goes. She seemed to accept that. Trust, cautiously given. Outside the office, footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway. The building was waking up. Soon, this moment would be swallowed by routine, meetings, explanations. Ethan straightened, feeling the familiar weight of leadership settle on his shoulders. Altered but unmistakable. Annie, he said, I'm going to ask you to do something very hard. She looked up at him, unafraid. I need you to leave this to me, he continued. At least for now. Her lips pressed together. You promise you won't forget? Ethan met her gaze. I promise I will not look away. Axed his owner. For a long moment, she studied his face, as if testing the truth of his words against everything she had learned so far about adults. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. But if you do forget, I'll come back. Despite himself, Ethan almost smiled. In that instant, he understood something he had missed for years. The blind spot in his system wasn't just technical. It was human. Ethan waited until Annie had finished her sentence before speaking again. I need to understand exactly how you got in, he said. Annie looked up at him, her expression tightening just slightly. Not fear calculation. The look of someone deciding how much truth was safe to give. The back service entrance, she said at last. The one near the loading dock. Ethan frowned. That entrance requires an access badge. Annie nodded. For people who work here. And you don't. No, she agreed, but the door stays open longer in the morning, for the carts. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Of course it did. Small optimizations. Designed to make life easier. Designed by people who never imagined they could be misused. When? He asked. Between 5 and 6, Annie replied. When the night people are tired and the day people aren't here yet. The first gap. Ethan walked slowly around the desk, the city stretching wide and indifferent behind him. He had always believed that true security wasn't about walls or locks. It was about timing. About knowing when attention drifted. And attention always drifted when no one thought it mattered. Did anyone talk to you? He asked. Not really, Annie said. One man asked who I was waiting for. And? I said my dad. Ethan felt a familiar, uncomfortable recognition settle in his chest. People rarely questioned a child who spoke with certainty. Especially a quiet one. Especially one who didn't look like trouble. After that, Annie continued, they stopped asking. Ethan turned back to her. You shouldn't have been able to get past the elevators. Annie tilted her head. I didn't use them. He stiffened. Explain. She pointed toward the far wall, where a narrow panel blended almost invisibly into the architecture. The stairs, she said. The emergency ones. They don't have cameras on every landing. Ethan stared. Those stairwells were designed decades ago, long before Titan Shield had existed. They had been upgraded, reinforced, monitored, but only in places where regulations required. No one liked emergency stairs. No one lingered there. They were overlooked by design. The second gap. How long were you in the building? Ethan asked quietly. Annie's voice dropped. Since last night. The words hung between them. You stayed here overnight? He said. She nodded. I found a place behind the supply room. It was cold. Ethan felt a sharp, unexpected surge of anger not at Annie, but at the building. The system. Himself. A 6-year-old child had slept inside his headquarters, hiding from the world, and no alarm had sounded. No one had noticed. Why didn't you leave? He asked. Annie looked down at her shoes. Because if I went home, I might not come back. And if I didn't come back, no one would fix it. Ethan had no immediate response to that. He pulled out his phone, not to call security, but to check the time. 6:42 a.m. In less than 20 minutes, assistants would begin arriving. Then, executives, then the carefully ordered chaos of a company at full speed. Time, once again, was slipping. Annie, he said, lowering his voice. You understand that if someone else finds out you were here, they won't see this the way I do. She nodded. They'll say I'm lying. They'll say worse, Ethan said. They'll say you were used, or that your father sent you. Her jaw tightened. He didn't, she said firmly. He doesn't even know I'm here. That worried Ethan more than anything else so far. You came alone, he said. Yes, and no one knows where you are. Annie hesitated. My mom thinks I'm at school. Ethan felt the weight of that settle heavily between his shoulders. This stops now, he said. She looked up sharply. I told you I'm almost done. That's not what I mean, he said. This stops because you are not safe. I was safe before, Annie said quietly. Before they said my dad did something bad, Ethan exhaled slowly. He recognized that logic. The logic of children forced to grow up around broken promises. Safety was not a place. It was an idea, and once it cracked, it never fit quite the same way again. You shouldn't have to do this, he said. I know, Annie replied. But I can. He studied her again, seeing not just intelligence, but endurance, something steadier than courage. Tell me about your dad, he said. Annie's shoulders relaxed a fraction. He likes pancakes, she said. But he burns them when he's sad. Ethan waited. He used to laugh more, she continued. He used to tell me stories about fixing things, about how if you follow the rules will protect you. Her voice wavered slightly, then steadied again. Now he doesn't say that anymore. 2000. Ethan turned back to the screen, needing the structure of data to keep his thoughts from fracturing. He pulled up internal access permissions from the last 18 months. Narrowing the field, patterns emerged quickly now that he knew where to look. Deferred reviews, overridden flags, approvals signed digitally, but never questioned. This wasn't negligence. This was design. Someone knew about the relay. Ethan said aloud. Annie nodded. My dad said someone always knows. A minute. And they used it, Ethan continued. They used it to make him look guilty. Yes, Ethan felt something settle into place. A hard, cold clarity. He had trusted layers of management to surface problems. Instead, the layers had buried them. He looked at Annie again. You didn't fix it, he said. She frowned. Not yet. You found it, Ethan said. That matters more. He moved decisively now, opening a secure channel on his phone not to security, but to his personal legal counsel. He typed a brief message, careful with his words. Need immediate review. Potential internal manipulation. High sensitivity. He locked the phone and looked back at Annie. I'm going to make sure you get home, he said, safely. Her eyes widened. You're not calling them? No, Ethan said. I'm calling someone who knows how to listen. She seemed to consider this, weighing his words against everything she had learned about adults. What if they don't believe you? She asked. Ethan met her gaze. Then I'll make them. Do. The confidence in his voice surprised even him. He stood and walked toward the door, then stopped. Before we leave, he said, there's something I need you to understand. Annie waited. You didn't break my system, Ethan said. You showed me where it broke first. She nodded slowly. That's what my dad says fixing really is. Ethan opened the door just as voices echoed faintly down the hallway. The day was beginning whether he was ready or not. He glanced back once more at the glowing screens, at the relay zone that pulsed quietly, exposed at last. The gap had been found. And once found, it could no longer be ignored. Ethan stepped into the hallway first. The executive floor was no longer silent. Footsteps echoed faintly from the far end. The sound of early staff arriving, assistants balancing coffee cups and tablets, junior executives rehearsing talking points in their heads. The building was waking up, and with it came the danger of witnesses. He glanced back at Annie. Stay close, he said. And don't speak unless I ask you something. It is alive. She nodded, immediately stepping into his shadow, small enough to disappear behind the clean lines of his coat. Her trust in him felt sudden and heavy, like something fragile placed directly into his hands. They moved quickly but calmly, the way people did when they didn't want to draw attention. Ethan nodded once to a passing executive, offered a brief morning greeting that sounded routine enough to avoid questions. No one looked twice. Annie kept her eyes down, her hand gripping the strap of her small backpack like an anchor. The elevator doors slid open. Ethan ushered her inside and tapped the private access code. As the doors closed, the tension he had been holding finally tightened its grip. The car descended smoothly, numbers dropping one by one. Annie let out a breath she had clearly been holding. Are we in trouble? She asked. Not yet, Ethan replied. And if I do this right, you won't be. It said. She studied his face, searching for cracks. My dad says not yet means someone is thinking. That's accurate, Ethan said. The elevator opened into a restricted corridor connected to a smaller conference suite. one of the few places in the building where he could speak freely without attracting attention. He guided Annie inside and closed the door behind them. The room was simple. Long table, frosted glass walls, a faint smell of lemon cleaner and old paper, the kind of room designed for quiet agreements and uncomfortable truths. Ethan pulled out a chair for Annie. She climbed into it, her feet once again dangling above the floor. "I need to make a few calls," he said. "While I do, I want you to eat something." He opened a cabinet and found a sealed package of crackers and a bottle of juice left over from a late-night meeting. He placed them gently in front of her. She looked at the food, then at him. "You don't have to. I know," he said. "I want to." She accepted it with a small nod, carefully opening the package as if afraid of making noise. Ethan stepped a few feet away and dialed his personal counsel. The line connected almost immediately. "I need you to come in," he said quietly. "Now. And I need discretion." There was a pause, then a measured response. Ethan ended the call without elaboration. Next, he messaged his head of internal audits, phrasing it as a routine early morning review. Nothing alarming. Yet, he pocketed his phone and turned back to Annie. "How long has your father been out of work?" he asked. 8 months, she replied between careful bites. "He tried to find another job, but they ask why he left. And when he tells the truth, they stop calling." Ethan nodded. Black marks followed people longer than success ever did. "Did he ever talk about what he found?" Ethan asked. "Not in words," Annie said. "He drew pictures instead, boxes and lines. He said if I could understand it, it meant he wasn't crazy." Ethan felt a tightening in his chest. "And you understood it?" "Yes," Annie said simply, because it didn't make sense. The statement was so pure, so unfiltered, that it cut through him. Adults learn to accept broken logic as long as it came, wrapped in authority. Children didn't. "How did you decide to come here?" he asked. Annie finished her juice and wiped her mouth with the back of her sleeve. "When I saw the same mistake again," she said. "The same one that got my dad fired. It was still there." Ethan leaned against the table. "You checked the system from home?" She nodded. "Only the parts they didn't close. They think kids just play games. Another failure. Another assumption. You understand that if this comes out the wrong way," Ethan said carefully, "it could hurt your father more." Annie looked up at him, her eyes steady. "He's already hurt," she said. "I just don't want him to disappear." The room was quiet again. Ethan glanced at the clock on the wall. 7:14 a.m. In less than an hour, the building would be fully alive. News traveled fast in places like this. Faster than truth. "There's something you need to know," he said. "What you found doesn't stop with one person." Annie tilted her head. "You mean it's bigger?" "Yes," Ethan replied. "And people who benefit from it won't give it up easily." She considered that. "My dad says when people are scared, they lie." "That's true," Ethan said. "Which means we have to be careful." A knock sounded softly on the door. Ethan straightened instantly, his body reacting before his mind. He moved between Annie and the door as it opened. A familiar face appeared older, composed, eyes sharp with years of experience. His counsel stepped inside, closing the door behind him without a word. "Good morning," the man said, then paused when he noticed Annie. Ethan met his gaze. "This is why I called," he said. The lawyer said nothing at first. He took in Annie's posture, the empty juice bottle, the seriousness in her expression. Finally, he nodded once. "Then we should sit," he said. They did. Ethan explained carefully, leaving nothing out, choosing his words with precision. He spoke of blind spots and deferred logs, of a termination that no longer made sense. He spoke of a child who saw what professionals had missed. The lawyer listened without interruption. When Ethan finished, the room felt heavier. "This changes things," the man said at last. "Yes," Ethan agreed. "It has to." The lawyer looked at Annie. "Do you know what it means to tell the truth when powerful people don't want it told?" Annie nodded. "It means you have to keep telling it." The man smiled faintly. "She's right." Ethan felt something settle into place. A plan. Still rough around the edges, but real. "We start quietly," he said. "Internal review, controlled exposure, no announcements." "And the child?" the lawyer asked. Ethan looked at Annie. "She goes home, and she stays there." Annie frowned. "You said you wouldn't forget." "I won't," Ethan said. "But I need you safe so I can finish this." She studied him, then nodded slowly. 5 minutes, she said. "That's what you gave me." Ethan almost laughed. "Yes," he said. And it turns out 5 minutes was enough to change everything. Do nice. Outside the room, the building buzzed with activity. Meetings were starting. Deals were forming. Decisions were being made without any idea of the fault line opening beneath them. Ethan rose from his chair, feeling the weight of what came next. The day had officially begun, and nothing about it would be routine. Annie left the building through a side entrance most employees never noticed. Ethan watched from a distance as she stepped onto the sidewalk, her small backpack bouncing lightly against her shoulders. His driver waited with the car door open, posture neutral, eyes forward. No one watching would have thought twice. Just another child being picked up before school. Another ordinary moment in a city built on them. When the car pulled away, something in Ethan's chest tightened. He stood there longer than necessary, hands in his pockets, the morning air cool against his face. For the first time that day, he felt the full weight of what he had agreed to carry. Annie had trusted him, not because he was powerful, but because he had listened. That kind of trust was harder to earn and far easier to betray. He turned back inside. By the time Ethan returned to his office, the executive floor was fully awake. Assistants moved briskly with tablets tucked under their arms. Voices drifted through open doorways, low and efficient. The machinery of success had resumed its rhythm, unaware of the fracture running through its foundation. Ethan closed his door and locked it, not out of paranoia, but precision. He sat at his desk and powered up the workstation, pulling up the isolated drive where he had saved Annie's findings. He didn't rush. Rushing was how mistakes hid. He worked the way he had in his early days, methodical, patient, distrustful of conclusions that arrived too easily. The blind spots stared back at him. He ran independent diagnostics, cross-checking with archived system states from before Marcus Hill's termination. The pattern was unmistakable now that he knew where to look. Access routed through the relay carried inherited trust tokens, bypassing deeper verification. It was subtle, elegant, dangerous. Someone had known exactly how to use it. Ethan pulled personnel access logs, filtering for who had clearance to adjust that relay. The list was short. Too short. Senior engineers, a handful of executives, people he had trusted enough to never look twice. His phone buzzed. A message from his counsel. "I'm staying close. Call if anything shifts." It already had. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his temples. He thought of Annie's hands hovering over the keyboard, careful not to touch anything without permission. He thought of Marcus Hill drawing diagrams instead of telling stories, trying to make sense of a world that had decided he was expendable. This wasn't just about a system flaw. It was about what happened when power learned how to erase evidence. He opened a secure channel to internal audit, rerouting permissions so the request came directly from his office rather than through standard executive chains. If anyone noticed, they would assume he was conducting one of his occasional deep dives, an eccentric habit, but a tolerated one, for now. As files loaded, Ethan's mind drifted back to the early years, when Titan Shield was small enough that he knew every engineer by name. Back then, people argued openly. Flaws were challenged, not hidden. Somewhere along the way, growth had taught the company how to be quiet instead. The audit results populated slowly. Deferred alerts, overridden flags, reviews marked complete without timestamps. It wasn't sloppy. Sloppiness left fingerprints. This was clean, intentional, and repeated. Ethan felt a cold clarity settle over him. Someone inside Titan Shield had built a second system inside the first, one that watched selectively, one that decided whose actions mattered and whose could be buried. He saved everything, duplicating the files across multiple isolated drives. If this went wrong, redundancy would be his only ally. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in," Ethan said, already knowing who it would be. His chief technology officer stepped inside, tablet in hand, expression neutral, but alert. "You wanted to see me?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Sit." The CTO complied, glancing briefly at the locked door. "Is this about the audit request?" "It is," Ethan replied. "Tell me about the relay optimization." The CTO blinked, then recovered quickly. "Which one?" "The one no one looks at anymore," Ethan said. A pause, barely perceptible. "But it was there. That component has been stable for years," the CTO said. "It reduces load, improves performance. And bypasses verification, Ethan added. The CTO's eyes flicked to the screen, then back. It inherits trust from upstream checks. That was the design. Whose design? Ethan asked. The CTO hesitated. It was approved at the executive level. That's not an answer. The CTO exhaled slowly. Yours? He said. Ultimately, Ethan nodded. Approval is not authorship. Silence stretched. Who maintains it? Ethan asked. A small group, the CTO said carefully. Senior clearance only. Names. The CTO listed them. Each name landed like a measured blow. When the list ended, Ethan spoke quietly. Marcus Hill was not on that list. No, the CTO agreed. He raised concerns. And what happened to those concerns? They were reviewed, the CTO said. And dismissed, Ethan finished. The CTO looked down at his tablet. At the time, the evidence suggested that he was the problem, Ethan said. Convenient, the CTO stiffened. Are you accusing someone of manipulating the system? I'm saying the system was manipulated, Ethan replied, and someone used it to make an example of a man who followed the rules. The CTO swallowed. This is serious. Yes, Ethan said. That's why I'm handling it. The CTO hesitated. If this goes public, it won't, Ethan said. Not yet, too. And the board? They'll know when I'm ready to tell them. The CTO studied him for a long moment. You're certain? Ethan thought of Annie's voice. Of her certainty that if she stopped looking, the truth would disappear. Yes, he said. I am. After the CTO left, Ethan remained seated, staring at the names on the screen. Loyalty, he realized, was not about silence. It was about responsibility, and responsibility, once ignored, always came back with interest. His phone buzzed again, a message from the driver. She's home. Safe. Ethan closed his eyes, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He opened a new file and began outlining a plan. Quiet interviews. Independent verification. No alerts triggered. No warnings sent. He would move like Annie had, carefully, deliberately, without drawing attention. The blind spot had been exposed. Now came the harder part, watching who panicked when they realized it was no longer dark. By mid-morning, Titan Shield was fully awake. Ethan moved through the building with the practiced ease of a man whose presence set the tempo without raising the volume. Meetings unfolded. Assistants whispered updates. Screens lit up with forecasts and assurances. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, Ethan counted patterns. He returned to his office and shut the door, leaving the blinds open. Transparency, he had learned, was often the best camouflage. He pulled up the personnel timeline surrounding Marcus Hill's termination, laying it side by side with the security logs Annie had helped uncover. The overlap was too precise to ignore. On the morning Marcus had been flagged for unauthorized access, the relay showed a surge of deferred verification. Nothing alarming on its own, but unusual when mapped against prior weeks. The access request attributed to Marcus had traveled through the blind spot, inherited trust, and emerged clean on the other side. The system had vouched for a lie. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the desk, hands clasped. This is how you do it, he murmured. You don't break the rules, you arrange them. He expanded the view, adding approvals and internal communications. An HR memo appeared, neutral in tone, decisive in outcome. Another email followed. Then another language carefully crafted to suggest urgency, risk, and the need for swift action. The kind of language boards trusted. Ethan recognized the rhythm. He had used it himself when time mattered more than deliberation. He opened the audit notes from the review committee. 5 names, all senior, all respected. Each had signed off within hours. No follow-up questions recorded. No dissent noted. The system had chosen Marcus because Marcus had made it easy. He was competent, quiet, and not protected by proximity to power. When he raised concerns, they were reframed as instability. When he insisted, he became a liability. The narrative had written itself. Ethan stood and walked to the window, staring down at the city. Somewhere in Brooklyn, Marcus Hill was likely sitting at a kitchen table, waiting for the day to tell him what it always told men like him. Nothing had changed. Ethan turned back, jaw set. He began scheduling interviews, not official ones. Conversations. He invited senior engineers for brief check-ins under the pretense of a routine performance review. He asked open-ended questions and listened for the pauses, the evasions, the practiced neutrality. Most answered easily. A few answered too easily. By early afternoon, a pattern emerged. The same names appeared at the edges of decisions. The same voices spoke last in meetings, gently steering outcomes without ever appearing to command them. Ethan requested a copy of archived backups from the period leading up to Marcus's termination, framing it as a compliance exercise. The files arrived quickly. Too quickly. Someone wanted to be helpful. That, too, was noted. He isolated a thread of internal messages flagged as non-essential. In it, a senior manager referenced closing the loop on a potentially disruptive element. The tone was clinical. The implication unmistakable. Ethan felt a familiar anger rise, but he didn't let it surface. Anger made noise. He needed silence. He cross-referenced access privileges. One name appeared repeatedly, positioned just close enough to the relay to manipulate it without drawing attention. A trusted executive, a long tenure, a reputation built on reliability. Ethan stared at the name, letting it sit. This was the danger of blind spots. They didn't announce themselves. They waited for the moment when trust was highest and scrutiny lowest. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from the board liaison. Ethan let it ring twice before answering. "Everything all right?" the voice asked. "Yes," Ethan said evenly. "I'm reviewing legacy security architecture." "Audit flagged something?" "Not yet," Ethan replied, "but I don't like surprises." A pause. "Understood." The call ended. Ethan exhaled slowly. Pressure would build now. It always did when people sensed movement beneath their feet. He pulled up a blank document and began outlining a chronology not of events, but of decisions. Who spoke? Who approved? Who benefited? It wasn't enough to know what had happened. He needed to understand why no one had stopped it. As the hours passed, the answer became clearer. Fear, not of failure, but of exposure. The relay had been designed to improve performance, yes, but it had also created an opportunity. One person discovered it. Another realized what it could hide. Together, they learned how to move through the system without ever appearing to touch it. And when Marcus Hill noticed, they acted quickly. Ethan closed the file and leaned back. He thought of Annie's words, "It only watches everyone else." A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said. His legal counsel entered, closing the door behind him. "I've reviewed what you sent," the man said. "It's enough to raise serious concerns." "Enough to act?" Ethan asked. "Yes," the lawyer replied. "But not enough to accuse." "Not yet." Ethan nodded. "I want to bring Marcus Hill in." The lawyer hesitated. Carefully, discreetly. Ethan agreed. "No promises. No announcements." "And the child?" the lawyer asked. "She stays out of this," Ethan said firmly. "She already did more than anyone should have asked of her." The lawyer considered this. "If this escalates, there will be questions." There already are," Ethan said. "They just don't know it yet." The lawyer left, and Ethan returned to his desk, pulling up Marcus's contact information. The number sat there, unchanged, as if waiting. He hesitated for the briefest moment. Then he dialed. The phone rang several times before a cautious voice answered. "Hello? Mr. Hill," Ethan said. "This is Ethan Cole." Silence. "Yes," Marcus said at last. "I know who you are. I'd like to speak with you," Ethan continued. "In person. About your work." Another pause. Longer this time. "I told everything I knew," Marcus said quietly. "It didn't matter." "I think it matters now," Ethan replied. "And I think it always did." A breath on the other end of the line. Measured. Wary. "When?" Marcus asked. "Today," Ethan said. "If you're willing." The line went quiet. Then came a single word. "Okay." Ethan ended the call and sat back, feeling the weight of the next step settle in. The system had chosen a scapegoat once. This time, it would have to answer for it. Marcus Hill arrived exactly on time. Ethan watched from behind the glass wall of the smaller conference room as the man stepped off the elevator and paused, just briefly, to orient himself. Marcus looked thinner than Ethan remembered. Not older, exactly just worn in a way that came from months of restraint, from learning how to take up less space in a world that had already decided it was done with you. Marcus wore a simple jacket, clean but frayed at the cuffs. His posture was careful, guarded. the posture of a man who had learned that confidence could be mistaken for defiance. Ethan stood as Marcus entered the room. "Mr. Hill," he said, extending his hand. Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking it. His grip was firm, but restrained, professional, controlled. "Mr. Cole," Marcus replied. His voice was steady, but his eyes moved quickly. Door, walls, ceiling, cataloging exits, cameras, risks. Ethan gestured to the chair. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure I should," Marcus said as he sat. "But my daughter said sometimes you have to show up even when it doesn't change anything." Ethan felt that land. "She's a remarkable child," he said. Marcus's expression tightened, concern flashing across his face. "Is she?" "She's safe," Ethan said immediately. At home, Marcus exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. "Then I'll listen." Ethan sat across from him, placing a folder on the table between them. He didn't open it yet. "I want to be clear," Ethan said. "This is not a formality, and it's not a defense." Marcus gave a humorless smile. "I've already been judged. You don't need to worry about my expectations." Ethan nodded. "That's exactly what worries me." He opened the folder and slid a single page forward, a system map. The relay zone highlighted. Marcus's eyes fixed on it instantly. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he let out a breath that sounded like something giving way. "You found it," Marcus said quietly. "Yes," Ethan replied. "With help." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, there was no surprise left, only a tired kind of recognition. "I tried to explain it," Marcus said. "Over and over. I documented everything. I followed protocol. I escalated through the proper channels. And they shut you down," Ethan said. "They reframed it," Marcus corrected. "They said my access attempts were irregular, that I was overstepping, that I was seeing patterns that weren't there." Marcus's hands tightened together. "When you're the one raising concerns, it doesn't take much to make you look like the problem." Ethan leaned forward. "Why didn't you come to me directly?" Marcus laughed softly, without humor. "I tried." Ethan stilled. "I sent 3 requests," Marcus continued. "They never reached you. At least, not in a way that mattered. By the time I realized that, it was already too late." Ethan felt a familiar, unwelcome sensation recognition. Layers of access. Filters designed to protect his time. Barriers that worked perfectly, too perfectly. "They needed someone to blame," Marcus said. "And I was convenient." Ethan nodded slowly. "Because you were loyal to the system?" Marcus looked up sharply. "Yes. That's the part I don't understand," Ethan said. "Why stay loyal when it was already turning against you?" Marcus considered this. "Because systems outlive people," he said. "If you don't protect them, they rot. And if they rot, everyone pays." Ethan sat back, the weight of the words pressing into him. He had built Titan Shield on that exact belief. Somewhere along the way, loyalty had been redefined as silence. "Do you know who did it?" Ethan asked. Marcus shook his head. "I suspected. But suspicion isn't proof. And proof disappears when the wrong people control the logs." Ethan slid another document forward, access timelines, internal approvals. Marcus scanned it, his jaw tightening. "They didn't even change the pattern," he said. "They just assumed no one would ever look again. They assumed trust would protect them," Ethan said. Marcus met his gaze. "Trust always does, until it doesn't." Silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile. "Your daughter," Ethan said carefully, "found the blind spot on her own." Marcus's eyes softened. "She's good at seeing what doesn't make sense." "She shouldn't have had to," Ethan said. "No," Marcus agreed. "But she learned from watching." Ethan thought of Annie sitting in his chair, eyes locked on the screen even as his voice startled her. Courage, he realized, didn't always look like fearlessness. Sometimes it looked like refusal. "I want to fix this," Ethan said. Marcus studied him. "Fix it how?" "Quietly at first," Ethan replied. "Then, completely." "And what happens to the people responsible?" Marcus asked. "That depends," Ethan said, "on how much they're willing to tell the truth." Marcus let out a slow breath. "I don't want revenge." "I know," Ethan said. "That's why I called you." Marcus looked down at the table. "I just want my name back." Ethan nodded. "You'll have it." For the first time since entering the room, Marcus's composure cracked. just slightly. His shoulders sagged, as if he had been holding himself upright by will alone. "Why now?" Marcus asked. "Why believe this after all this time?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He thought of Annie, of her steady voice, of the way she had trusted him without leverage or protection. "Because someone reminded me what loyalty is supposed to look like," he said at last. Marcus followed his gaze, understanding dawning. Ethan closed the folder. "I'm going to need your help," he said, "but I won't ask you to do anything that puts you at risk." Marcus nodded. "I already lost everything once." "Not everything," Ethan said. "You raised a daughter who wouldn't let the truth disappear." A faint, fragile smile touched Marcus's lips. "Tell me what you need," he said. Ethan felt the final piece lock into place. The machine had chosen a scapegoat because it believed loyalty could be exploited. It had underestimated the kind that endured. Marcus stayed longer than Ethan expected. They moved from the conference room back into Ethan's office, the space now feeling different, less like a command center, more like a crime scene waiting to be understood. Ethan closed the door and activated a privacy mode that dampened sound and disabled internal sensors. Officially, it was meant for sensitive negotiations. Unofficially, it was one more layer of silence. Marcus stood near the desk, hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning the familiar layout. "Nothing's changed," he said quietly. "Same view. Same screens. That's the problem," Ethan replied. Too much stayed the same. Ethan pulled up the financial dashboard, overlaying it with the security architecture Marcus knew so well. At first glance, the numbers were clean: quarterly revenue, operating margins, steady growth, the kind of stability investors loved. But Ethan didn't stop there. He drilled down. Vendor payments appeared. Consulting fees, infrastructure maintenance costs, individually reasonable, collectively patterned. Marcus leaned forward. "That frequency," he said. "That's not random." "No," Ethan agreed. "It's rhythmic." They aligned the payment schedule with the deferred verification windows Annie had highlighted. The overlap was subtle but undeniable. Every time the blind spot pulsed, money moved. Small amounts, routed through entities designed to look boring enough to avoid scrutiny. "Ghost vendors," Marcus said. "Yes," Ethan replied. "With real signatures, they traced approvals. Digital fingerprints led back to executive-level clearance, people authorized to sign without secondary review. People whose judgment was trusted by default." Marcus let out a breath. "They weren't just hiding access," he said. "They were laundering trust." End quote. Ethan felt a grim satisfaction at the precision of the phrase. He opened a deeper ledger, one he rarely accessed himself. Compensation adjustments, special bonuses, deferred incentives tied to performance metrics that no one outside the executive circle ever questioned. "Look at this," Ethan said. Marcus studied the figures, his brow furrowing. "Those spikes," he said. "They coincide with the same windows. Every time the relay was exploited," Ethan said, "someone got rewarded." X. Marcus straightened slowly. "And when I flagged irregularities, they needed you gone," Ethan finished. Silence followed, thick and heavy. Ethan thought of the times he'd praised efficiency, streamlined oversight, delegated trust. Each decision had felt reasonable. Each had carved out a space where accountability thinned. "Why not just fire you quietly?" Ethan asked. Marcus shook his head. "Because quiet firings invite questions. Public ones send messages. Messages to anyone else who might notice." Ethan nodded. "So they made you the story." Marcus's jaw tightened. "They made my name a warning." Ethan closed the ledger and leaned back. The pieces were coming together now, not as a single villain, but as a system that rewarded silence and punished attention. "This isn't one person," Ethan said. "No," Marcus agreed. "It never is." Ethan stood and walked to the window, hands resting against the glass. Below, the city moved with relentless momentum. He wondered how many other systems functioned this way, smooth on the surface, corrosive beneath. "Here's what we do," Ethan said without turning around. "We verify independently. No internal reviews. No committees." Marcus nodded. "External forensic accounting. And parallel security audits," Ethan added. "Blind tests." Marcus allowed himself a small, grim smile. "You're going to make them nervous." "That's the point," Ethan said. "But not yet." He turned back to Marcus. I need you to help me reconstruct the original timeline. Every report you filed, every response you got. Marcus hesitated. Some of that's gone. Not all of it, Ethan said. You kept copies. Marcus met his gaze. I did. Good, Ethan replied. We'll need them. They worked for another hour, rebuilding events with careful precision. Marcus's memory filled in gaps the logs couldn't. Meetings where questions were redirected. Emails that arrived just late enough to be irrelevant. Conversations that ended with reassurances instead of answers. As they worked, Ethan felt a growing clarity. This wasn't just about restoring Marcus's reputation. It was about dismantling a quiet economy built on controlled ignorance. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Ethan glanced at the clock. Late afternoon, he opened the door to find his assistant standing there, expression composed but alert. You have a call, she said. Board liaison. Marked urgent. Ethan nodded. Tell them, I'll return it shortly. She hesitated, eyes flicking briefly to Marcus. They're asking about the audit requests. Tell them I'm reviewing legacy exposure, Ethan said, and that I'll brief them tomorrow. She nodded and left. Marcus watched the door close. They're starting to feel it. Yes, Ethan said, and when people feel pressure, they make mistakes. He saved their working files to a secure drive and handed Marcus a slim, encrypted device. Everything you remember, put it here. Don't keep copies elsewhere. Marcus accepted it, his grip firm. What about my daughter? He asked quietly. Ethan didn't hesitate. She stays out of sight, out of reach. Marcus nodded, relief evident. She didn't do this for attention. I know, Ethan said. She did it because she couldn't live with the lie. As Alive did. Marcus stood, adjusting his jacket. Neither could I. They shook hands, this time without hesitation. After Marcus left, Ethan returned to his desk and stared at the numbers one last time. They no longer looked neutral. They spoke now, telling a story of decisions made in the dark. He opened a new document and titled it simply, Truth. Then he began to write. Ethan didn't return the board liaison's call right away. He stood instead at the window, phone in his hand, watching a construction crew across the street guide steel beams into place. The work was loud, visible, impossible to ignore. Everyone could see what was being built, how it rose piece by piece. No one pretended it happened by accident. Inside Titan Shield, the most important structures were invisible. He turned back to his desk and opened the file Marcus had helped him assemble. Dates, names, decisions. Each entry was modest on its own, reasonable enough to escape notice. Together, they formed a pattern that was no longer deniable. This was the cost of telling the truth, Ethan thought. Not exposure, not scandal, but time, attention, the willingness to keep looking long after it became uncomfortable. His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't the board. A text from the driver. They're home, Marcus and Annie. Ethan allowed himself a brief pause, a breath that reached all the way down. He pictured Annie at a small kitchen table, legs swinging as she did homework, pretending if only for a few hours that the world made sense again. He returned the board liaison's call. Ethan, the voice said immediately, tight with polite concern. We're hearing about unusual access requests. Yes, Ethan replied evenly. You will. When? The liaison asked. Tomorrow, Ethan said. After I finish verifying, it said, a pause. The board doesn't like surprises. Neither do I, Ethan said. That's why I'm preventing one. The call ended without resolution. Ethan knew what that meant. Lines were being drawn quietly. People were calling people. Explanations were being prepared. He opened a new secure channel and contacted an external forensic firm. One he had used years ago during Titan Shield's earliest days, before reputations became liabilities. He authorized a limited scope engagement, careful with wording, precise with boundaries. Then he waited. Late afternoon light stretched across the office, turning the city amber and softening edges that were, in truth, anything but. Ethan's thoughts drifted to a different apartment. A different table, Marcus Hill's kitchen. He imagined the quiet there, the kind that settled after disappointment had been repeated too many times. He imagined Marcus pouring coffee he didn't taste, staring at walls that had learned his silence. And Annie. Annie, who had learned that when adults stopped listening, systems kept lying. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. When the forensic firm responded, it was exactly as he expected, professional, discreet, alert to the gravity beneath the surface. They requested access. Ethan granted it, but only to the data he had already isolated. No one else needed to know yet. The waiting was the hardest part. As evening approached, Ethan gathered his things and left the office later than usual. The building was quieter now, the day's urgency draining away into evening routines. In the lobby, a janitor nodded to him, earbuds in, mop resting against a bucket. "Long day?" the man asked casually. "Long," Ethan agreed. Outside, traffic crawled. The city exhaled. Ethan walked a few blocks instead of taking the car, letting the noise and movement ground him. He passed a diner with fogged windows and a handwritten sign advertising pancakes for dinner. Pancakes. The thought caught him off guard. He returned home to an apartment that reflected success without warmth, clean lines, neutral colors, furniture chosen for restraint rather than comfort. He loosened his tie and sat at the kitchen counter, phone face down, the silence pressing in. He thought of his own childhood, of nights when his mother worked late and the apartment felt too quiet. Back then, he had believed that building something powerful would make the quiet go away. He had been wrong. His phone vibrated again. This time, it was a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Cole," a woman's voice said when he answered. "This is Laura Benton. I'm calling from the forensic firm." "Yes," Ethan said, straightening. "We've completed a preliminary pass," she continued. "And I wanted to flag something for you directly." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "Go ahead. The financial movements tied to the security blind spot," she said. "They don't just benefit internal actors." Ethan closed his eyes. "External?" "Yes," Laura replied. "Shell vendors connected to offshore accounts. This goes beyond internal misconduct." Ethan felt the weight shift, deepen. "How confident are you?" he asked. "Confident enough to recommend expanding scope," she said, carefully. Ethan nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Do it," he said. "But keep it quiet. Aid yourself." "Understood," Laura said. "One more thing." "Yes?" "The access pattern that initiated this," she said. "It started years before Marcus Hill raised concerns. He wasn't the first to notice." Ethan sat very still. "What happened to the others?" "They stopped escalating," Laura said. "Or they left." Ethan ended the call and stared at the wall. This was bigger than he had thought. Not just a scapegoat, but a lesson repeated until it worked, a system that taught people what happened when they spoke up. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Tonight." Ethan didn't need to guess who that was. He typed back a single word. "Tomorrow." He placed the phone down and stood, walking to the window. The city lights blinked on one by one, a grid of lives intersecting without ever fully touching. Annie had come to him because she believed truth was something you fixed, not something you waited for. Ethan understood now that fixing it would cost him comfort, allies, perhaps even control. It would cost him the illusion that leadership meant insulation. The cost of telling the truth was not paid all at once. It was paid daily, slowly, willingly. He turned away from the window, resolved. Tomorrow, he would say what needed to be said, and once said, there would be no putting it back. The executive floor looked different when Ethan arrived the next morning. Nothing had physically changed. The same glass walls, the same muted colors, the same low hum of climate control and distant city noise. But Ethan felt it immediately, the tension beneath the surface. The careful way conversations paused when he passed, the slight delay before doors closed. Someone had talked. He walked into his office without acknowledging the glances, setting his briefcase down with deliberate calm. Leadership, he had learned, was as much about what you ignored as what you confronted. He checked his phone. 3 messages from board members, 2 from senior executives, 1 from Robert Langley. Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he opened the secure file Laura Benton's team had expanded overnight. New connections had been mapped. Offshore accounts, consulting firms with no employees, vendor contracts that existed only on paper. The blind spot wasn't just a technical weakness, it was a corridor, and money had been walking through it for years. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in," Ethan said. Robert Langley stepped inside, closing the door behind him with practiced ease. At 52, Robert looked exactly as he always had, immaculate suit, silver-threaded hair. A smile calibrated for reassurance. He had been with Titan Shield almost from the beginning. One of the early believers. One of the voices Ethan had trusted when trust was still cheap. "You asked me to wait until today," Robert said mildly. "So here I am." "I didn't ask," Ethan replied. "You offered." Robert smiled faintly and took a seat without being invited. Fair enough. Ethan studied him in silence, noting the way Robert sat relaxed, confident, as if nothing fundamental could shift beneath him. "People are uneasy," Robert said. "Audit requests, external firms. It feels unnecessary." "Does it?" Ethan asked. Robert spread his hands. "We're a stable company. Investors expect predictability. So do systems," Ethan said. "Until they don't." Robert's smile thinned. "You're chasing a ghost, Ethan." Ethan leaned back. "I spoke with Marcus Hill yesterday." The air changed. Robert didn't move, but something behind his eyes flickered annoyance, perhaps, or calculation. "He was terminated for cause," Robert said smoothly. "That's well documented." "So is the blind spot," Ethan replied. "Now," Robert chuckled softly. "You're letting emotion get in the way of judgment." "That's interesting," Ethan said, "because emotion is usually what people accuse others of when facts stop being convenient." Robert's gaze hardened slightly. "Be careful." Ethan leaned forward. "You first." Gubby lied. Silence stretched between them, thick with years of shared history and unspoken agreements. This was how it always happened. Not with shouting, not with threats, but with the slow erosion of certainty. "You built this company," Robert said. "Don't let one anomaly undo it." "One anomaly doesn't," Ethan said. "A pattern does." Robert stood. "If you proceed the way you're going, you'll destabilize things you don't fully understand." Ethan met his gaze. "That's exactly what Marcus was told." "Everyone." Robert's jaw tightened. "He wasn't a team player." "No," Ethan said. "He was loyal to the wrong thing." Robert stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "I see." He turned and walked out without another word. Ethan remained seated, pulse steady. The conversation had confirmed what data already suggested. Robert hadn't denied anything that mattered. He hadn't needed to. An hour later, the board meeting began. Ethan entered the conference room to a semicircle of familiar faces, expressions carefully neutral. Coffee cups steamed, tablets glowed. Polite greetings were exchanged, but the ease was gone. "We'll begin," the chair said. "Ethan, you asked for this session." "Yes," Ethan replied. "I did." He didn't rush. He never rushed. "There are concerns," he continued, "about our security architecture and associated financial oversight. I initiated an independent review." A murmur moved through the room. "This review has uncovered a long-standing vulnerability," Ethan said. "One that was known, exploited, and concealed." A board member cleared his throat. "By whom?" "That's still being determined," Ethan replied. "But I can say this. The system failed because people learned how to hide inside it." Questions followed. Controlled, careful. Ethan answered each one with facts, not conclusions. He spoke of deferred verification, of ghost vendors, of incentives aligned too neatly with silence. When Marcus Hill's name was mentioned, the room shifted. "He was dismissed improperly," Ethan said, "and we will correct that." The silence that followed was not agreement. "It's risky," someone said, "reopening old cases." "It's riskier not to," Ethan replied. The meeting ended without resolution, but with something more important momentum. The board hadn't stopped him. They hadn't fully supported him either. That would come later. Ethan left the room and returned to his office, closing the door behind him. He sat down and stared at the city beyond the glass. His phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "Annie asks if the pancakes can wait until Saturday." Ethan smiled despite himself. "Yes," he typed back. "Tell her Saturday is perfect." He set the phone down and let the quiet settle. The executive floor was built to protect power. It filtered voices, softened consequences, delayed accountability. It had done its job well. Too well. Ethan knew now that the hardest part was still ahead. Systems fought back when threatened. They always did. But somewhere in Brooklyn, a 6-year-old girl believed that if you saw something broken, you fixed it. And Ethan Cole was done pretending he hadn't seen it. Ethan slept less than 3 hours. It wasn't anxiety that kept him awake, but calculation. His mind moved through contingencies the way it always had: if this, then that. If pressure here, release there. By the time dawn thinned the darkness over Manhattan, he had already accepted one truth he couldn't optimize away. This would hurt people who didn't think they deserved it. He arrived at the office earlier than usual, the building still half asleep, the executive floor hushed in a way that felt intentional now. He didn't go straight to his office. Instead, he walked the long way, past conference rooms and glass-walled corners, where conversations usually happened in whispers. Today, there were no whispers yet. They were waiting. He checked his phone. A message from Laura Benton. "We're ready when you are." Another from his counsel. "Expect resistance. Document everything." Ethan replied to neither. He entered his office, closed the door, and stood for a moment without turning on the lights. The city beyond the windows was gray and undecided. Clouds hanging low, as if even the sky hadn't made up its mind. He thought of Annie, of the way she had looked at him when he said he wouldn't forget. Children, he had learned, didn't need many words to know when adults were lying. They felt it in pauses, in changed tones, in promises wrapped too neatly. "Don't promise if you won't come." He turned on the desk lamp and opened the secure folder marked Truth. The forensic team had delivered their preliminary report overnight. It was careful, conservative, devastating. It confirmed the existence of shell vendors, linked payment flows to the same narrow windows in the security relay, and identified a small cluster of internal accounts with unusual override privileges. No accusations, just facts, the kind that made denial expensive. A knock at the door broke the quiet. "Come in," Ethan said. His assistant stepped inside, face composed but eyes alert. "Robert Langley is asking to see you," she said. "He says it's urgent." Ethan didn't look up. "Tell him I'm unavailable." She hesitated. "He said he'll wait." "Then he'll wait," Ethan replied. She nodded and left. Ethan exhaled slowly. This was the moment systems tested resolve, not with explosions, but with inconvenience, with pressure framed as concern. His phone buzzed again, a message from Marcus this time. "Annie says to tell you she finished her math test early. She's worried you might forget." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "I won't," he typed back. "Tell her that." He stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street far below. People moved with purpose, unaware of the quiet battle unfolding above them. He wondered how many promises were broken every day simply because they were inconvenient to keep. At 9:17 a.m., the board liaison requested an emergency check-in. Ethan declined. At 9:34, legal flagged a concern about scope creep. Ethan forwarded it to counsel without comment. At 10:02, Robert Langley stopped waiting. He walked into Ethan's office without knocking. "You can't shut me out," Robert said, his tone tight now, the practiced calm finally fraying. "Not like this, Aid." Ethan turned slowly in his chair. "I can," he said. "And I am." "This is reckless," Robert snapped. "You're destabilizing the company." "No," Ethan replied. "I'm stabilizing it. You're just not used to seeing the cost." Robert scoffed. "You think the board will back you when they realize how exposed we are?" "They already realize," Ethan said. "They're deciding whether they can live with it." Robert stepped closer. "And what if they decide they can't live with you?" Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "Then they'll have to explain why." Silence stretched between them, brittle and charged. "You're making this personal," Robert said at last. Ethan shook his head. "You did. When you made an example out of Marcus Hill." Robert's face hardened. "He was a risk. He was loyal," Ethan said. "And you punished him for it." Robert laughed sharply. "Loyalty is knowing when to stop digging." "Rated." "No," Ethan replied. "That's obedience." Robert stared at him, then straightened, smoothing his jacket as if reclaiming control. "Be careful, Ethan," he said. "You don't know how far this goes." Ethan's voice was steady. "I'm about to." Robert turned and left, the door closing harder than necessary behind him. Ethan didn't move for a long moment. This was the moment Annie had been afraid of, the moment when adults said the right words and then disappeared behind excuses. He stood and picked up his phone. "Laura," he said when the line connected. "Expand the scope." There was a brief pause. "That will trigger notifications." "I know," Ethan replied. "Do it anyway." He ended the call and immediately dialed his counsel. I want a formal reinstatement prepared for Marcus Hill, he said. Backdated. With compensation. That will raise questions, the lawyer said. Yes, Ethan replied. That's the point. By noon, the building felt different. Emails slowed. Meetings were postponed. People spoke more carefully, glancing over shoulders they had never worried about before. The system had sensed disruption and was recalibrating. Ethan watched it happen with a detached clarity. At 12:46 p.m., the board requested his presence. He gathered his things and left his office without looking back. The boardroom was full when he arrived. Faces turned toward him, some curious, some guarded, some openly displeased. Ethan took his seat without ceremony. You've made several unilateral decisions, the chair began. Yes, Ethan said, and I'll make more. Murmurs followed. The review is no longer internal, Ethan continued. External auditors are now fully engaged. You didn't wait for approval, someone said. I didn't promise to, Ethan replied. Silence. Ethan placed a single document on the table. This is the reinstatement of Marcus Hill, he said. You can sign it now, or you can explain later why you didn't. Oh, a long pause followed. This could expose us, the chair said carefully. We're already exposed, Ethan replied. The question is whether we acknowledge it. No one spoke. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle. He thought of Annie, waiting to see whether adults meant what they said. I'm not asking you to like this, he said. I'm asking you to stand by it. One by one, signatures appeared. Not all at once, not enthusiastically, but they appeared. When the meeting ended, Ethan walked out alone. His phone buzzed. From Marcus. Annie wants to know if Saturday is still happening. Ethan smiled. A small, private thing. Yes, he typed. And tell her I'll be there. This time, he didn't add anything else. Promises, he had learned, didn't need decoration. They needed follow-through. The Johnson apartment sat above a laundromat that never quite smelled clean. Ethan noticed it the moment he stepped out of the car, warm air thick with detergent and steam drifting up from the vents, the low hum of machines cycling endlessly below. Brooklyn traffic rolled past in uneven waves, horns blaring without urgency, as if the street itself had learned how to live with noise. Marcus waited at the entrance, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. He looked different here, less guarded, less like a man bracing for impact. You didn't have to come yourself, Marcus said as Ethan approached. Yes, Ethan replied. I did. They climbed the stairs together. No elevator. Narrow steps worn smooth by years of use. Family photos taped to doors. A child's drawing half peeled from a wall. This building had no doorman, no cameras worth mentioning, no illusion of security, no locks that mattered. Marcus unlocked the door to apartment 3C and stepped aside. Inside, the space was small but orderly. A couch that had seen better years. A kitchen table scarred with old cuts and homework dents. The faint smell of coffee and something sweet lingered in the air. Annie sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully coloring inside the lines of a notebook page. She looked up. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she stood. You came, she said. Ethan nodded. I said I would. Is it Messit? She studied his face the way she always did, serious. Searching. Measuring whether the words matched the effort it had taken to say them. Satisfied, she returned to her coloring without another word. That, Ethan realized, was trust. Patricia Johnson emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She froze when she saw Ethan, her expression tightening instantly, not fear, but something sharper. Protection. Marcus spoke quickly. Pat, this is Ethan Cole, with the SAND. I know who he is, Patricia said. Ethan met her gaze. And I know I don't deserve your time, he said. But I'm grateful you're giving it to me. She hesitated, then nodded once. Sit, she said. Dinner's almost ready. They sat at the small table. Ethan folded himself into a chair that creaked under unfamiliar weight. Annie climbed into her seat, swinging her legs as Patricia placed plates in front of them. Pancakes. They weren't perfect. Edges uneven, one slightly darker than the others. Marcus noticed Ethan looking and smiled faintly. I burn them when I'm thinking too much. Ethan picked up his fork. They look fine to me. They ate in quiet for a few moments. The kind of quiet that didn't need to be filled. Outside, someone laughed. A door slammed. Life continued. Unaware of the small reckoning happening in apartment 3C. "I want to apologize," Ethan said at last. Patricia didn't look at him. "We've heard apologies before." "I'm dulled." "I know," Ethan replied. "That's why this one comes with action." He placed the reinstatement documents on the table, sliding them toward Marcus. "Effective immediately," he said. "Back pay. Benefits. A public correction." Marcus stared at the papers, unmoving. "They admitted it?" Patricia asked. "They acknowledged it," Ethan said. "Which is the first step." Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the pages. He read slowly, carefully, as if afraid the words might rearrange themselves. "They're giving my name back," he said quietly. "Yes," Ethan replied. "And more than that." He looked at Annie. "You were right," he said. "The system was broken." Annie glanced up. "Did you fix it?" "Not yet," Ethan said honestly. "But I'm working on it." She nodded. "Okay." That was all. Patricia studied Ethan for a long moment. "Why?" she asked. "Why now?" Ethan didn't dodge the question. "Because your daughter refused to let me," he said. "And because I realized I'd built something that protected the wrong people." Patricia looked at Marcus, then at Annie. "We didn't ask for this," she said. "I know," Ethan replied. "You deserved better without having to fight for it." Silence settled again. Outside, a siren wailed briefly, then faded. "Saturday," Annie said suddenly, looking at Ethan. "You promised." "Yes," Ethan said. "I did. Okay," she said, returning to her drawing. "Then you didn't lie." Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. After dinner, as Patricia cleared the table and Marcus folded the papers carefully, Ethan stood by the window. The glass rattled faintly when a subway passed underground. "This place," Ethan said quietly. "It doesn't hide anything." Marcus joined him. "That's the point," he said. "Nothing to protect means nothing to lose." Ethan nodded. He thought of his office, its locks, its layers, its blind spots. "I'm going to make things uncomfortable," Ethan said. "For a lot of people." Marcus smiled faintly. "Good." Ethan turned to leave an hour later, the city already dark outside. Annie walked him to the door. "You didn't forget," she said. "No," Ethan replied. "I didn't." She considered this. "Then you can come back." Ethan nodded. "I will." As he stepped into the hallway, he understood something with sudden clarity. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the point where the truth stopped being theoretical. Marcus didn't sleep that night. Patricia could tell by the way he sat at the kitchen table long after Annie had gone to bed. The reinstatement papers spread neatly in front of him, as if order alone could make them real. The apartment was quiet except for the distant rumble of the subway and the occasional hiss of steam from the radiator. "You should rest," Patricia said softly. Marcus nodded, but didn't move. "Every time I close my eyes," he said, "I expect it to disappear." She sat across from him, resting her hand on the edge of the table. "It won't," she said. "Not this time." Marcus stared at his name on the page. Clean, unqualified, no footnotes, no suspicion attached. For 8 months, he had learned how to carry himself differently, how to speak less, how to anticipate the look people gave him when they asked why he'd left Titanshield, and he told the truth. He had learned to smile at rejection and to stop explaining himself to strangers who had already decided. Shame, he had discovered, didn't announce itself loudly. It settled into posture, into silence, into the habit of apologizing for things you hadn't done. In Manhattan, Ethan Cole stood in his office long past sunset, the city a reflection of scattered lights behind him. He replayed the evening in his mind, not the documents, not the legal implications, but Annie's voice. "Then you didn't lie." Ethan loosened his tie and let it fall onto the desk. The day's meetings had ended, but the building was far from empty. Somewhere down the hall, executives were still talking in low voices. He could feel the resistance taking shape, the way systems always pushed back when pressure was applied. He opened his laptop and reviewed the expanded forensic report. The picture was clearer now, and uglier. The blind spot hadn't just been used to move money. It had been used to test people, to see who noticed, to see who would stay quiet. Those who stayed were rewarded. Those who didn't were erased. Ethan closed the file. He thought of Marcus. sitting in a kitchen that had no locks worth mentioning, surrounded by truth that had nowhere to hide. He thought of how easily Titan Shield had hidden its own. The next morning, Marcus returned to the building. He stood across the street first, watching employees filter in with coffee cups and backpacks, watching security wave people through without looking closely. The glass tower reflected the sky like it always had, impressive, distant, untouchable. Except now, it wasn't. Marcus adjusted his jacket and crossed the street. Inside the lobby, a security guard glanced at his badge, then looked up again, surprised. "Welcome back," the guard said. The words landed harder than Marcus expected. "Thank you," he replied, his voice steady despite the tightness in his chest. The elevator ride was quiet. Marcus stared at the numbers as they climbed, feeling as though he were ascending into a version of himself he wasn't sure he still recognized. When the doors opened on the executive floor, conversation paused briefly, then resumed. Some faces looked away. Others nodded cautiously. No one smiled. Marcus walked to the conference room. Ethan had assigned him a temporary office, modest but private. A start, not a statement. He set his bag down and stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, breathing slowly. The city looked the same from this height, but he didn't. A knock at the door made him flinch. Ethan stepped inside. "You're early," Ethan said. "I didn't want to be late," Marcus replied. Ethan nodded. "That makes sense. They stood there for a moment, two men measuring a silence that meant different things to each of them. "How are you holding up?" Ethan asked. Marcus considered the question. "I'm here," he said. "That's something." "Yes," Ethan agreed. "It is." Ethan gestured to the chair. "There's something I need to tell you before the day gets away from us." Marcus sat. "The board signed the reinstatement," Ethan said. "But not everyone is happy." Marcus let out a quiet breath. "I didn't expect them to be. They're worried about exposure," Ethan continued. "About precedent. Truth has a way of setting those," Marcus said. Ethan smiled faintly. "It does." He grew serious again. "This won't be comfortable. People will test you. They'll question your motives. Some will try to provoke you into making mistakes." Marcus nodded. "They already tried once." "Yes," Ethan said. "And this time, you won't be alone." Marcus studied him. "Why are you really doing this, Ethan?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He thought of Annie, of her refusal to look away even when his voice startled her. "Because I let the system teach people the wrong lesson," he said at last. "And because someone small enough to be ignored reminded me what responsibility actually looks like." Marcus absorbed this quietly. "There's one more thing," Ethan said. "The investigation will go public eventually. When it does, your name will be part of it." Marcus stiffened. "As what?" "As the person who tried to stop it," Ethan replied. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "That's all I ever wanted." Ethan stood. "Good. Because there's no turning back now." As Ethan left, Marcus remained by the window, watching the city move below. He felt the old weight still there, the memory of being escorted out, the looks, the doubt, but something else had joined it. Ground. That afternoon, Annie's teacher called Patricia. "She's been distracted," the teacher said gently, "drawing buildings instead of doing her math." Patricia smiled. "She does that when she's thinking." That evening, Annie spread her drawings across the kitchen table. Boxes, lines, windows, gaps, filled in carefully with crayon. "Daddy," she said, "does the building still have the blind spot?" Marcus sat beside her. "Not anymore," she nodded, satisfied. "Good," she said, "because blind spots make people disappear." Marcus pulled her into a quiet hug, holding her just a little longer than usual. In Manhattan, Ethan Cole looked out over the city once more, aware that the hardest part was still ahead. Systems could be fixed, money could be traced, titles could be restored, but shame lingered, and the only way to remove it was to stand where it had been placed and refuse to move. The press conference was scheduled for noon. Ethan hadn't wanted it that way. He would have preferred silence, procedure, the slow correction of records without spectacle, but systems that failed publicly demanded public accountability. And the board, careful, calculating, had agreed that control was best exercised in daylight. By 11:30, the lobby was crowded with cameras and voices layered over one another like static. Reporters rehearsed questions they already believed they knew the answers to. Employees watched from upper floors, Faces pressed briefly to glass before retreating into hallways. Marcus stood in a side conference room, jacket folded neatly over the back of a chair, hands resting flat on the table. He had worn the same suit he'd worn the day he was terminated, cleaned, pressed, still a little too large from months of stress and missed meals. "You don't have to go out there," Ethan said, standing across from him. Marcus shook his head. "Yes," he said. "I do." Ethan studied him. The shame Marcus carried was quieter now, but it hadn't vanished. It had learned to sit upright, to look people in the eye. "This won't be kind," Ethan warned. "They'll ask why you didn't go to the authorities, why you didn't fight harder." Marcus met his gaze. "I did fight," he said. "Just not loudly enough to be believed." Ethan nodded. "I'll be beside you. That's not what matters," Marcus replied. "What matters is what you say." The words stayed with Ethan as they walked toward the podium. The room fell quiet when Ethan stepped forward. He waited not for silence, but for attention. When he had it, he didn't begin with numbers or legal language. He began with responsibility. "I'm here because Titan Shield failed," he said. A ripple moved through the crowd. "We failed to listen. We failed to verify. And in doing so, we failed one of our own." Cameras clicked. Pens moved faster. Ethan gestured to Marcus. Marcus Hill raised concerns about a security vulnerability years ago. Those concerns were dismissed. Evidence was mishandled. A narrative was constructed that made him the problem. Marcus felt his chest tighten, but he didn't look away. "That narrative was wrong," Ethan continued. "And I signed off on it." A murmur spread, louder this time. Ethan didn't stop. "Leadership is not insulation. It is obligation. And I did not meet mine." He turned fully toward Marcus then, the room watching. "I am sorry," Ethan said. "Not carefully. Not strategically. Sorry for the damage done to your name, to your work, to your family." The word family landed harder than Ethan expected. He thought of Annie, of the way she had looked at him when she tested his promises. "This apology costs me power," Ethan said, his voice steady. "And it should, because power that cannot admit error is not worth holding." Marcus swallowed. He felt the room watching him now, waiting for his response. He stepped forward. "I didn't want an apology," Marcus said. "I wanted the truth." The simplicity of it cut through the noise. "And now," a reporter called out. Marcus paused. "Now I want to do my job," he said. "The right way." Questions followed. Sharp ones. Predictable ones. Who else was involved? How much money was lost? Would there be arrests? Ethan answered what he could. What he couldn't, he promised would be answered in time. When it was over, the crowd thinned slowly, leaving behind a room that felt oddly hollow. Ethan stepped down from the podium, his legs heavier than they had been before. "That was effective," his counsel said quietly. "It wasn't meant to be," Ethan replied. "It was meant to be honest." Marcus stood beside him, shoulders squared. "You didn't have to say all of that." "Yes," Ethan said. "I did." They parted without ceremony. That afternoon, internal memos went out. Investigations expanded. Suspensions followed. Names that had once carried weight were suddenly spoken carefully, as if volume alone might implicate someone. The system was recalibrating. Ethan returned to his office and closed the door, finally alone. He sat at his desk and stared at the city, feeling the familiar pull of control slipping not violently, but decisively. His phone buzzed. From Patricia. Annie watched on TV. "She says you didn't look scared." Ethan smiled faintly. "I was," he typed back. "Tell her that's okay." He set the phone down and leaned back, the weight of the day settling into him. Apologies, he realized, were not endings. They were doors you opened, knowing you might not like what waited on the other side. Across the city, Marcus sat at the kitchen table again, papers folded away, Annie drawing beside him. "They said your name," she said. "Yes," Marcus replied. "Did it hurt?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Not like before." She nodded, satisfied. "Good." Back in Manhattan, Ethan shut off his office lights and prepared to leave. The building hummed around him, changed in ways that couldn't be measured yet. He knew the cost wasn't fully paid. It never was. But today, he had paid the part that mattered most. He had stood where the shame had been placed, and he hadn't moved. The arrest did not happen in front of cameras. That disappointed a few people. Ethan learned that the morning after the press conference, when his counsel informed him that federal investigators had moved quietly, precisely, and without spectacle. No lobby swarming with agents, no handcuffs flashing under studio lights, just subpoenas served, accounts frozen, offices sealed after hours. Justice, it turned out, preferred efficiency. Ethan stood by the window of his office as the news reached him, the city below moving with its usual indifference. He felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, only a steady confirmation that something irreversible had begun. They won't fight this publicly, his counsel said over the phone. Not at first. The evidence is too clean. And privately, Ethan asked. There will be pressure, the lawyer replied. There always is. I was place of. Ethan ended the call and sat down, opening the internal dashboard one more time. Names had been removed. Permissions revoked. Entire chains of approval collapsed into empty spaces where authority used to live. The machine was quieter now. Across the city, Marcus Hill sat at a temporary desk on the executive floor, his new badge clipped neatly to his jacket. He hadn't asked for a corner office or a title adjustment. He had asked for access. The first thing he did was audit the fixes, not the public ones, the real ones. He worked carefully, documenting changes, rebuilding checks that couldn't be bypassed by convenience. He moved slowly, deliberately, resisting the urge to rush, simply because the company now expected results. Several people avoided him, others watched him too closely. One stopped by his desk late in the afternoon. A junior engineer who looked barely old enough to have grown cynical yet. I just wanted to say, the engineer began, voice low. I saw what you did. Marcus looked up. I didn't do it alone, the engineer nodded. I know. But it matters. After he left, Marcus sat back and stared at the screen, the familiar grid now behaving the way it always should have. He felt something loosen inside him, something he hadn't realized he'd been carrying so tightly. That evening, Ethan didn't go home right away. He walked instead. Manhattan at dusk was a study in contradictions, light bleeding into shadow, urgency dissolving into routine. He passed a small park where an older man fed pigeons with practiced patience, tossing crumbs one at a time. Nearby, a woman argued into her phone, voice sharp with frustration that would likely fade by morning. Ethan sat on a bench and let the city move around him. Quiet justice, he realized, didn't announce itself. It repaired. It removed rot without demanding applause. It asked only that the work be done thoroughly and without shortcuts. His phone buzzed. From Marcus. They're fixing it the right way this time. Ethan allowed himself a small nod. From Patricia, a moment later. Annie says the building looks safer on TV now. Ethan smiled. At home, Annie sat at the kitchen table. Homework spread out in careful rows. Marcus watched her from the doorway, the reinstatement letter now tucked away in a drawer instead of living on the table like a fragile artifact. Daddy, Annie said without looking up. Are they done? Not yet, Marcus replied. But they're close. She nodded, accepting that. Fixing takes longer than breaking, she said. Marcus smiled faintly. Who told you that? She shrugged. I just know. Later that night, Ethan received a call from the board chair. You've changed the company, the chair said. Ethan considered that. No, he replied. I let it change back. A pause. There will be consequences, the chair warned. Yes, Ethan said. There already are. The call ended. Ethan poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window, looking out at a city that didn't care who led which company, only that things worked when they needed to. He thought of Annie's words again. Fixing takes longer than breaking. He was willing to take the time. The following week, internal policies were rewritten. Whistleblower protections expanded. Direct reporting lines re-established. None of it made headlines. None of it trended. But employees noticed. So did Marcus. On Friday afternoon, as the week finally loosened its grip, Marcus packed up his things and headed for the exit. He passed Ethan's office on the way out and paused. Saturday, Marcus said. Ethan looked up from his desk. Saturday. Two. They shared a brief, understanding nod. That night, Annie laid out her crayons on the living room floor, sorting them by color, then by size. She hummed softly as she worked, a small ritual that helped her make sense of the world. Daddy, she asked, do bad people always lose? Marcus sat beside her. No, he said honestly, but sometimes they stop winning. She considered this, then smiled. That's enough. Marcus hugged her gently, careful not to interrupt her focus. In Manhattan, Ethan turned off his office lights and left the building alone. The lobby was quiet, the security guard offering a nod that felt warmer than before. As Ethan stepped into the night, he understood something that had taken him years to learn. Justice didn't need to be loud to be real. It only needed someone willing to stay when everyone else had learned to walk away. Saturday arrived without ceremony. No sirens, no emails marked urgent. Just a clear morning and a sky that seemed undecided about whether it wanted to be blue or gray. Ethan drove himself this time, leaving the car a block away and walking the rest, hands in his pockets, moving at the pace of someone who didn't want to be mistaken for an interruption. Marcus opened the door before Ethan could knock. "You're early," Marcus said. "I didn't want to be late," Ethan replied. Marcus smiled faintly and stepped aside. The apartment looked different in daylight. Softer, the edges less sharp. Sunlight spilled across the small living room, catching dust in the air and turning it into something almost beautiful. On the floor, Annie sat surrounded by crayons and paper, legs tucked beneath her, hair pulled back neatly as always. She looked up. "You came," she said, not surprised. "Yes," Ethan replied. "I said I would." "Action." She studied him for a moment, then nodded once and returned to her drawing. That, Ethan had learned, was her version of welcome. Patricia emerged from the kitchen with a dish towel over her shoulder. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan said. "Thank you." They sat around the small table as Marcus poured coffee and Patricia set out a plate of pancakes, this batch evenly browned, carefully watched. "I practiced," Marcus said. Annie glanced up. "They're better when you're not sad," she said matter-of-factly. Marcus laughed softly. "I'll remember that." They ate together, the conversation unhurried. Patricia asked about work, not details, not names, just whether things were quieter. Ethan answered honestly. "Yes," he said. "Quieter doesn't mean easier, but it's better." Annie pushed her plate away and slid one of her drawings toward Ethan. It was a building, tall and rectangular, with windows carefully colored in. Some squares were shaded darker than others. "What's this?" Ethan asked. "The building," Annie said. "And the dark parts? Places people don't look," she replied. "I filled them in." Ethan nodded. That was important. She tilted her head. "Will they stay filled?" "They will if people keep looking," Ethan said. She considered that. "People forget." "Yes," Ethan agreed. "They do." She picked up another crayon and added a line at the bottom of the drawing. "Then you have to remind them." After breakfast, Marcus walked Ethan to the window. Outside, the street moved slowly. Weekend traffic light. And forgiving. "They're watching me at work," Marcus said quietly. "Not in a bad way. Just closely." "That will pass," Ethan replied. "Consistency outlasts suspicion." Marcus nodded. "I know." Patricia gathered dishes in the sink, giving them space without being asked. The apartment hummed with ordinary sounds, water running, a radio playing softly somewhere below, a neighbor laughing in the hallway. "This is what I wanted you to see," Marcus said. "Not the papers, not the apology." Ethan understood. "You wanted me to see what was at stake." "Yes," Marcus said. For her. They looked at Annie, now lying on her stomach, chin propped in her hands as she colored carefully, staying inside the lines with deliberate precision. "What did you tell her about all this?" Ethan asked. "The truth," Marcus replied. "That sometimes grown-ups make rules to protect themselves instead of others, and that sometimes those rules have to be fixed." Ethan nodded. "That's honest." "It's enough," Marcus said. "She doesn't need the rest." Before leaving, Ethan knelt beside Annie. "I wanted to say something to you," he said. She looked up, curious but unafraid. "You were right," Ethan continued, "about fixing things. Is easier." She waited. "Fixing isn't just about tools or computers," he said. "It's about people paying attention." She nodded. "My teacher says that." Ethan smiled. "She sounds wise." Annie handed him the drawing. "You can keep it," she said, "so you don't forget." "I won't," Ethan said, taking it carefully. "I promise." She studied his face for a moment, then reached out and straightened his tie with small, precise movements. "There," she said. "Now you look like you mean it." Easy. Ethan laughed, surprised by the sound. Outside, as he walked back toward his car, the city felt different, not changed. Exactly. But closer. Less abstract. He folded the drawing carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. That afternoon, Marcus returned to the office briefly, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He checked the latest updates, reviewed the new reporting lines, approved a fix suggested by a junior engineer who looked stunned to be listened to. "Thank you," the engineer said, startled. "For what?" Marcus asked. "For answering," the engineer replied. Marcus nodded. "That's the job." Across the floor, Ethan stood in his office doorway and watched the exchange without interrupting. This, he thought, was the change that mattered. Not the memos, not the announcements, the way people spoke when they believed someone would hear them. That evening, Ethan went home and pinned Annie's drawing to a corkboard above his desk. He stood back and looked at it for a long moment, the filled-in windows, the careful lines, the quiet insistence that blind spots were a choice. He understood now what children learned from watching adults. Not what they said, what they did when it was inconvenient. He turned off the light and let the apartment settle into silence. The good kind. The kind that came after a day spent doing what you said you would do. The building no longer felt like it belonged only to Ethan. That realization came to him quietly, weeks after the investigation had settled into process and consequence, after the headlines had moved on, and the noise had thinned to a manageable hum. He stood one morning in the lobby of Titan Shield, watching employees arrive not with the practiced urgency of before, but with something looser, something human. They spoke to one another more. They lingered at the coffee station. They asked questions out loud. It was not perfection, but it was different. Ethan rode the elevator alone to the executive floor, the soft ascent giving him time to think. Power, he had learned, was not lost all at once. It was redistributed in small, deliberate choices: who you listened to, who you protected, who you believed when the system told you not to. He unlocked his office and stepped inside, sunlight stretching across the floor in long, honest lines. Annie's drawing still hung above his desk, corners curling slightly now, as if the paper itself had relaxed. He didn't straighten it. Marcus arrived an hour later. He knocked once, then waited, not out of hesitation but habit. Ethan looked up from his desk and nodded. "Come in." Marcus stepped inside, carrying a slim folder. He looked steadier these days. Not triumphant, Marcus had never been that kind of man, but grounded. The way people did when their feet finally touched something solid. "We're ready," Marcus said. "For?" Ethan asked. "The final report," Marcus replied. "Security, finance, oversight. All aligned." Ethan nodded. "Any objections?" "Some," Marcus said. "Mostly from people who preferred the old quiet." "And?" Ethan asked. "They were heard," Marcus replied. "Then overruled." Ethan smiled faintly. "Good." Marcus hesitated near the desk. "There's one more thing." Ethan waited. "We've added a clause," Marcus said. "It requires direct response to internal concerns within 48 hours. No filters, no gatekeeping." Ethan considered this. "That will be inconvenient." "Yes," Marcus said. "That's the point." Ethan nodded. "Approved." Marcus relaxed slightly, as if releasing something he had been holding just in case. "Annie helped me name it," he added. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "She did?" Marcus smiled. "She called it the looking rule." "The looking rule," Ethan repeated. "Yes," Marcus said. "It means if someone points at something and says it's broken, you have to look. You can disagree later, but you can't pretend you didn't see it." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "That might be the most expensive rule we've ever adopted," Marcus shrugged. "It's cheaper than losing people." After Marcus left, Ethan sat alone for a long moment, the folder untouched on his desk. He thought of all the rules he had signed off on over the years, all the language designed to protect the institution first and the individual second. The looking rule reversed that order. That afternoon, Ethan left work early. He walked again, letting the city carry him without agenda. He passed the diner where the pancake sign still hung in the window, faded now, edges curled by sun and time. He smiled at it and kept walking. In Brooklyn, Marcus arrived home just before dinner. Annie was at the table, homework spread neatly, Patricia moving between stove and sink with the practiced rhythm of someone who had learned how to keep things together even when they pulled apart. "Daddy," Annie said, looking up. "Did you fix it?" Marcus set his bag down and sat beside her. "We did," he said. She frowned slightly. "All of it?" "No," Marcus replied honestly. "But enough to make it harder to break again." She considered this. "That's okay," she said. "Nothing stays fixed forever." Marcus smiled. "You're right." She tapped her pencil against the table. "That's why you have to keep looking." "Yes," Marcus said. "That's why." That evening, Ethan received a final message from his counsel. The case is closed. Consequences enforced. Reforms accepted. Ethan set the phone down and stood by the window, the city reflecting back at him in quiet layers of light. He felt no urge to celebrate, no need to mark the moment with anything more than attention. He thought of the first morning, of his voice sharp with shock, of a small girl who flinched, but didn't look away. He had asked who gave permission to do this. The answer, he understood now, was not found in titles or access badges. Permission came from silence, and it was revoked the moment someone refused it. Weeks later, Ethan attended a modest ceremony he hadn't announced publicly. No press, no speeches, just a room with a few dozen employees, engineers, analysts, assistants, people who had stayed quiet longer than they should have because they believed no one would listen. He spoke briefly. "Integrity," he said, "is not measured by what we build when things are easy. It's measured by what we fix when it costs us." No applause followed, just nods. That was enough. At home that night, Ethan took Annie's drawing down from the corkboard. He studied it once more, the filled-in windows, the deliberate lines, and then placed it in a drawer with documents that mattered. Some truths didn't need to be displayed to be remembered. Across the city, Annie fell asleep with her crayons still scattered on the floor, her drawing half finished. In it, the building stood tall, but this time every window was filled in, no dark squares left behind. In the quiet that followed, the world did not become fair, but it became a little more honest. And for those who had learned to keep looking, that was the measure that remained. The story reminds us that injustice rarely survives because it is powerful, it survives because it is ignored. Systems fail not only when they are corrupt, but when good people stop looking closely and trust convenience over conscience. True integrity is not proven by titles, wealth, or authority, but by the courage to listen when it is uncomfortable, and to act when silence would be easier. Sometimes, it takes the honesty of a child to expose what adults have learned to overlook, that every decision affects real lives, real families, and real dignity. The lesson is simple, but demanding justice begins the moment we choose to pay attention, to protect the vulnerable, and to take responsibility for what we allow to continue in our name. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.